trigger warning to people that in today's case there is going to be talk of torture. This is a war case, and I will also be telling a little story at the end of the video. Hey, it's Mel, hope you're doing well, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. Today we're going to be looking at the true story of the 2013 war film The Railway Man, starring Jeremy Irvine, Nicole Kidman, and most importantly, Colin Firth. It was directed by Jonathan Teplitsky, apologies if I mispronounce any names. It's a powerful film which focuses on the effects of war and PTSD. This is a story about two men, sworn enemies, who became best friends. There's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. The film is set in World War II. It tells the story of British soldier Eric Lomax, who is sent to a POW prisoner of war camp, where he is tortured by a Japanese officer named Takashi Nagase. Years later, Eric learns that Takashi is still alive, and his wife pushes him to confront his past. The real Eric Lomax was born on the 30th of May 1919 in Edinburgh. His parents were John and Elizabeth. His dad worked as a civil service clerk. The family lived in a house at 11 Bedford Terrace in Portobello. Eric loved trains. He was a train enthusiast. In 1939 he joined the Royal Corps of Signals before the war broke out. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant in December 1940 and was one of thousands of soldiers who surrendered not by choice to the Japanese in Singapore in February 1942. The Japanese enemy at the time forced prisoners to construct the infamous Burma Railway, also known as the Death Railway, and a part of it still does exist. Eric was one of 30,000 British prisoners who were set to work on the railway line, and it took 12 months to build. It was built along the River Kwai, and it connected Bangkok and Mulmeen. The barbaric project of building the railway claimed the lives of 250,000 men. If a person refused to work, they were either beaten or shot. Like Eric Lomax, many of the prisoners were starved and tortured. In order to build such a railway, you would need an army, and that's exactly what the Japanese did. They used their massive workforce to their advantage. If a prisoner broke a piece of equipment, like maybe a shovel or a piece of machinery, or if they simply just didn't work quick enough, they were hit with bamboo sticks. Various methods of torture were used on these prisoners. They were treated like animals. They were often thrown into cages, left in their own mess, like their urine. They were starved, not given much water, and they would be left in these cages sometimes for days, just sitting there being baked by the sun during the day. Now moving on to Takashi Nagase, Eric Lomax's torturer. He was a military interpreter who spoke English, who was born on the 20th of February 1918 in Japan. He worked for the Kempeitai at the construction of the railway in Thailand. He was involved in the interrogation and torture of many prisoners. He watched the torture and taunted the prisoners. He would give the green light for the torture to occur. He also joined the war at a very young age. In February 1942, Eric surrendered to the Japanese and was taken to the POW camp where he met Takashi. At the time, he was an army officer and 19 years old. He spent 3.5 years of slave labour and torture. He was repeatedly beaten and interrogated after his captors found a radio receiver that he'd made from spare parts. Eric would be beaten, patched up by doctors, and then interrogated again. This left permanent scars on his mind and his body, specifically his back and wrists. Worst of all, he was waterboarded. This is like one of the worst forms of torture. War is a horrific thing. It really is, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, I just don't understand it. Why can't we just share things, share land, and just love each other and be kind? I don't know. For those of you that don't know, waterboarding is when a person is held down, has a cloth put over their mouth, and water poured on their face so they can't breathe. You basically feel like you're drowning. Actor Jeremy Irvine, who plays the young Eric Lomax in the film, lost a lot of weight for the role, and he admitted to also being waterboarded himself for seconds at a time over a duration of 2 days. Him and Colin Firth spoke to the real Eric Lomax to make the film as realistic as possible. Eric went through hell, and for him, he suffered a lifetime of trauma. He endured different types of torture. But despite all this, he never gave up and he survived. His courage and bravery had such an impact on Takashi. He never forgot Eric. World War II ended on the 2nd of September 1945. When Eric was released, he returned to the UK. For years, Eric isolated himself and just didn't speak to his family about what he endured. Eric's first wife was Agnes, nicknamed Lan, and he had 2 daughters named Linda and Charmaine. They married on the 20th of November 1945, just 3 weeks after Eric's release. They got engaged the night before he left to the war. During his capture, Agnes waited for 3.5 years, got no word from Eric. She had no idea whether he was alive or dead. Agnes and Eric were together for 37 years. In 1980, Eric met his second wife, Patty Wallace, who was 43 years old and a Canadian nurse. They met on a train to Glasgow. Eric sadly left Agnes in 1981. Patty moved to the UK in 1982, and a year later, her and Eric got married. Patty died in 2012, a year before the film's release. In 1995, Eric wrote a book about his war experiences called The Railway Man, and it was very successful. 50 years after the war ended, Eric met his torturer, Takashi. In 1993, Eric came face to face with Takashi, and their meeting was recorded for a documentary. Takashi immediately broke down crying. He felt such shame and guilt over what he had done to Eric, and Eric did forgive Takashi. The two men shook hands and gave each other a hug. Takashi said, quote, "We treated you and your countrymen very badly and I am so sorry," end quote. In the film, there is one line that stands out to me, and it's said by Colin Firth, and it is, "At some point the hating has to stop." And that's exactly what Eric did. Like, he moved on with his life. Him and Takashi became great friends. They would go over to each other's houses. Takashi met Eric's wife, and they would read books together, play chess. They would even call each other on the phone and send each other letters. They were pretty close. For Takashi, after the war ended, he spent the rest of his life working towards forgiveness and reconciliation. He became an activist for post-war reconciliation and against Japanese military. He also became a devout Buddhist priest. He turned his life around and got married. He died on the 21st of June 2011. Eric died shortly after on the 8th of October 2012. He was 93 years old. Over the years, bodies have been recovered from the Burma Railway and they've been given a proper burial. During construction of the railway, workers who were shot or just died from exhaustion were simply thrown all together in like a mass grave, just pretty much thrown on top of each other, treated like animals. That's inhumane. Other victims sadly committed suicide later in life because they just couldn't deal with the trauma. Eric did get help for his PTSD and he lived the rest of his life in peace, but he never forgot what happened to him. I don't think you can ever forget something like that. Here's a little story that I was told by my dad. So basically, there's this bar in Salford. I don't know if it's open anymore, but I wasn't born yet either. Like, none of my siblings. Like, this is the early gates of my parents' relationship, so they were just getting to know each other. One day, my mum and dad walk into this bar. My dad turns around to my mum and says, "I want to introduce you to someone special. He's a nice guy, he's very old, and he looks like he's had a rough life." Right before my mum was introduced, his friends basically told my mum and dad, like, "Whatever you do, don't mention the war, don't mention the word rat either." Turns out that this man, I don't even know his name, he used to like let on to people by saying like, "Hi champ, how you doing champ?" Turns out that this man was also put into a cage with other soldiers and rats would like crawl over his body and bite him, and that's why you could never mention the word rat, because if you did, he would do this like motion as if he was getting like rats off of him. He was traumatized. That's all for today. That was the true story of the 2013 film The Railway Man. As always, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.